Coming to you live on tape from the Canadian Jewish News office in Concord, Ontario. It's the Benchwarmers.
Hey everybody,
CJN.
Welcome back. Thanks for having us back into your ears and car stereos, maybe. I don't know.
Straight into your ear holes.
Is there anywhere else that people listen to podcasts? I feel like headphones while you're commuting and in your car.
Maybe like lying in bed, hearing the dulcet, smooth tones of our voices.
It's weird to think of anyone ever like sitting on a couch in their living room and just being like, I'm going to listen to a podcast now. As much as I would love them to, I don't think of people just listening to podcasts. Just
like
sit and
idly with a cup of coffee.
Yeah, give it my full attention. Yeah, radio either. I mean, I listen to radio like when I cook and when I commute. But like, other than that, I mean, sometimes I play video games. Anyways.
I think people used to listen to the radio as like a sitting down activity.
Oh yeah, and they say they used to just look at the radio, like you just looked at anything because like it was so scintillating because it was 1925 and it was the most amazing thing you'd ever heard.
Absolutely.
Well, wherever you are listening to us, we appreciate you coming and joining us for this latest edition of the Benchwarmers. Today our theme is tennis. Soon we'll have an interview with Marvin Glassman. Marvin Glassman is a writer for the South Florida Sun-Sentinel.
Well as the Canadian Jewish News.
That's right. He's been writing for the Canadian Jewish News since 1981, and his focus has been covering the Canadian Open, which is currently going on. We should say that we are taping this on Saturday afternoon, and Bianca Andreescu is currently playing in the semifinals.
We speak a lot about the tournament as it's coming and as it's happening with Bianca in the semis. So... spoiler alert, the tournament will be over by the time this hits your ear holes or living rooms.
You'll already know the result of that tournament. We have a great conversation with Marvin, talks a lot about the history of Jews in tennis and the more recent history of Jews playing tennis and all kinds of things. It is a really interesting conversation.
It was a really lively back and forth, not unlike the very game of tennis we're discussing.
That's right. Before we get started, we want to mention as well, we want to mention the CJN Prize is currently receiving submissions. It is a essay writing contest for young writers between the ages of 18 and 29. The deadline for submissions is September 6, 2019, and you can send your entries to the CJN Prize at thecjn.ca.
That's right. It's open to all writers in Canada under the age of 30. Who are between the ages of 18 and 29, I should say, so under the age of 30 and above of majority age.
I am no longer eligible, Gabe, because, as you know, I just turned 30.
Well, happy birthday.
Yeah.
As well, we know that many Jews consider adulthood the age of bar mitzvah, but us,
you must be 18.
You must be 18 to participate in this.
But there's prizes. The first prize, $1,800.
If you were to write a personal essay, what do you think it would be about?
Ooh, I don't know. I always think of like writing a personal essay for Facts and Arguments in the Globe, and then I get like 3 paragraphs in and decide there's a reason I'm not a professional writer.
Right.
So,
but if there's a topic to you, other than about your favorite Jews in sports, which is what essentially this is a personal essay.
Right. I don't know. I mean, on a Jewish theme, I don't know if I have one off the top of my head. It's nothing to do with the Toronto, I guess. Oh, there is something that I was thinking about, which was I thought about this for a while, which is that did you ever go to Open Window when you were a kid, the bakery?
Yes, at Bathurst and Eglinton.
Yeah, and there was one at Lawrence Plaza as well.
Mm-hmm.
They used to sell these blueberry buns that I remember grandfather getting, and I was thinking about it and like how much I would like to eat one of those. And Open Window no longer exists. It hasn't for a while.
The window is closed.
Yeah, and I was looking about this. I was trying to search online, like, is this a common thing? And apparently it is a Toronto-only thing, like mostly a Toronto thing, the blueberry bun.
The blueberry bun.
Like the Jewish blueberry bun.
Jewish Toronto. If there's no Jewish blueberry buns in New York
apparently not. It's mostly a Toronto thing, and like no one really... People were like trying to cobble together recipes and figure out how it is. It was sort of bready, like it was sort of a bready exterior. Anyways, I was talking about this with people in my family last week about like, well, we should try and make this or we should try and bake this somehow. Then, anyways, this morning I was at a Jewish bakery. I won't mention them by name. It's a Harbor Bakery, whatever. I was at Harbor Bakery this morning, and they had blueberry buns.
You can find us on Friday afternoons and Saturday mornings at various Jewish bakery establishments. If you're not at Hamish Bagel, you're at.
I love Harbor Bakery so much. I will shout them out without needing to be paid for it.
Absolutely.
If they want to advertise it, great. If any other Jewish bakery wants to take my love of Harbor away by advertising, I'm willing to be bought. But anyways.
In Montreal this week, and I had a rugelach and a cheese bun.
Oh, did you go to
Chesky's?
Oh, Chesky's is so good.
It is so good.
That place is great.
Yeah, the little like cheese ricotta flour.
Yeah, great rugelach.
Unbelievable. The rugelach was so good, and it was really like an episode of Stiesel in there. Like there's all these young men like yelling into their flip phones. carrying like a plastic bag with rabbinical studies in
It's a
it.
very, very Orthodox part of Montreal.
Exactly. It's quite likable, and they're all kind of yelling at each other, and it's
But anyway, so Harvard Bakery has the blueberry buns. I don't know. I don't remember seeing them before, and I've gone a lot of times. But maybe they only have them in the summer. They were a little breadier than I remember. Like I remember being more of a bread shell than this was more like bread stuffed. It was more like a bread stuffed with blueberries, but it was delicious.
If you were Paul Hollywood, sort of scraping the bottom of this bun with a knife,
it wouldn't get the Hollywood handshake, but it would get it would get a good. You'd get on to the next round. You wouldn't be eliminated for this blueberry bun.
You would be like he would look at it. He would tear it apart with his bare hands. And
it's very good consistency.
He would finger the inside. That's the way he does.
Anyways, so the blueberry buns at Harvard. I guess I would write about that, but now the answer is solved, or the question's solved by they still make them apparently at least one bakery.
Well, if you would like to write about your rediscovery of your favorite Jewish baked good, please submit to the CJN contest. The CJN prize for, as we said, it's open until September 6th. Thank you very much. 2019. And if you're under 30 and above what we call the Canadian legal bar mitzvah, the age of 18, or bat mitzvah, I should say, you are able to submit. So before September 16th, a personal essay, and you could win $100,000, $1,800.
And the CJN Prize is brought to you by the presenting sponsors, the Israel and Golda Koshitsky Center for Jewish Studies at York University, and F&B Kosher, and as always, Canadian Jewish News, which brings you our podcast as well. You can find our podcast on the CJN website, cjnews.com, also on the CJ Podcast Facebook page, although I think we actually missed posting it last time, so I'll have to be more careful about that. And as always, find us on Twitter at Menschwarmers. We're there for all your hottest Jewish sports takes on Twitter.
That's right. And don't forget to find us. Subscribe on iTunes, subscribe on Stitcher, subscribe on Spotify, subscribe on Zencast, subscribe on Google Podcasts,
wherever you get your
subscribe
podcasts.
on everywhere else.
Yeah. So, Gabe, not much has changed in the last couple weeks. I'm speaking a little better. My mouth's healed up somewhat.
Your grill looks a little.
Yeah, I still have the brace in there. Hopefully, it's coming out on Monday. In a couple days, so we'll see. But not much has changed in the larger sports and Jews world, in the sense that it is still the dog days of summer.
Yep.
Not a lot going on. We do talk to Marvin about Jews and tennis.
Yep.
One notable thing, follow up from our last podcast, we talked about Antonio Brown with the synagogue in his house. Antonio Brown is now missing from the Oakland Raiders. Apparently, the story came out yesterday that Antonio Brown, for those who didn't catch our last episode, not Jewish, but owns a house with a synagogue in it for various reasons.
He bought a house in Miami, and he kept the synagogue as is, ark and everything, and I think his minion of hangers-on blesses up in there.
So since we last talked about him, there's been two big developments. The first one is that he got frostbite in the end of July by
very impressive.
Yeah, very impressive. By forgetting or not wearing the proper shoes in a cryptotherapy tank of some sort. Cryotherapy.
Cryptotherapy would be really cool.
Cryptotherapy would be some sort
just
of Bitcoin.
Dying. They bury you alive, and you got to get out of it. That's cryptotherapy.
No, cryptotherapy is like they bury you in Bitcoin and they regenerate you. Sorry, for cryotherapy treatment, he got frostbite, and then he was apparently unable to be found by the Oakland Raiders. And the story came out
because he was in his crypto coffin.
The story came out last night that the reason he is upset with the Raiders is because he refuses to wear anything but his old helmet, and apparently he says the new helmets they have block his vision. So he's refusing to report until they let him wear his old helmet. So they should check it. They should check the synagogue if they want to find him.
That's right.
It was Tisha B'Av yesterday, so maybe he was there.
It was Tisha B'Av. Well, I got a story for you and some thoughts.
All right, let me hear it.
Driving through America on this past vacation,
Yep.
It occurred to me, we spent a lot of time browsing through Christian radio.
Sure.
And then led me to think there's a lot of religious radio out there. Are we the Jewish version of that?
In as much as anything can be the Jewish version of that. I mean, Christian radio is like a lot of preaching. Like there's music sometimes, and there's a whole genre of Christian music.
Yeah.
Both rock and country and hip hop, I guess.
And Christian soul is a lot like Kirk Franklin.
Yeah, a lot of gospel. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel the way I like to echo the words of Hank Hill about Christian rock. You're not making Christianity better. You're just making rock and roll worse.
Right. Well, certainly NPR. That's Jewish radio. Terry Gross is the Kirk Franklin of the radio.
Yeah, I know. I mean, as much as we're trying to be unique and being a podcast about Jews and sports, we are, like many podcasts, hosted by Jews and about sports. But yeah, I don't know. I guess we're as close as a thing there is to being Jewish radio. I mean, you could put up a playlist of us and our sister podcast, the Canadian Jewish Schmooze and Tablets Unorthodox, and I don't know what other Jewish podcasts are out there. I think Forward does a podcast.
Yeah, I mean, you call it Fresh Air and This American Life.
Well,
those are. I mean, This American Life, slice of life stories that Jews like to hear about.
Jewish, but not Jew exclusive.
Right. No, it's not Jew exclusive for sure. Though it was really great listening to this Christian radio and how much it sort of is like regular radio, the same way we talk about the Canadian Jewish Prize. The radio person, and I totally honest, said this in the regular, Christian voice. We're here to represent our Lord Jesus Christ, be happy with them, and it's our 3:00 contest. The fourth caller to call in and tell us how many lepers thanked Jesus.
What do they get? Salvation?
I think they get maybe probably they get a free pass to heaven. And so the person spoke that, and that was the contest, and we're running something similar. So it made me think of us.
Why are you listening to that in the first place? I mean,
it's just you're bored, you're driving for 7 hours.
Yeah,
hitting the scan button.
Yeah, it's true.
But I was saying to our producer earlier, I was hoping it would happen in like a real goofy radio voice. Like do they have like a morning zoo? Like a Carlos and the Chicken, but for Christianity? Oh, it's Ezekiel and the antelope out here, and the golden ram. Ezekiel and the golden ram.
A lot of like queued up sound clips that are just like different pieces of the Sermon on the Mount and things like that.
That's right. There'll be an insult, and then you'll hear like a booming God laugh.
Yeah, I mean, that must exist to a certain degree. I don't know if there's drive time Christian radio. I don't know what they do during drive time.
I assume they do something drive time during Christian radio, but you could have our version. We could have a contest. Let's do it in a radio voice. Hey, the fourth caller into the CJN podcast to tell us how many times did Abraham try and kill Isaac?
No, it should be sports related. It'd be like, tell us the career home run total of Hank Greenberg. The fourth caller is going to get through.
Yeah, that's right. And what do you win? A blueberry bun from the Open Window Bakery.
I guess so. Yeah, anything else going on in the sports world we should cover this week? I mean, the Mets have been hot. And not anything Jewish particularly. Jewish owners, obviously.
I bet Seinfeld is really happy.
Yeah, I feel like the Mets are the default Jewish team.
I think
as
so,
far
too.
As it goes.
We sort of, Jamie and I have been to Yankees and Mets games together. It seems like the Yankees are the team of the Italian fans and the Mets are the team of the Jewish fans.
Yeah, I mean, in so much as that line exists altogether these days. Definitely more Jewish Mets fans.
Yeah, they're doing hot. I put out the flag to our new friend Michael Rotherman of Duke University Baseball and the Chatham Anglers Cape Cod League team. He did not respond.
Okay, that's something.
We're going to keep going after him. So if you're listening to this, if you are or know Duke catcher Mike Rotherman, please let us know.
I think that's about it for this week. We'll move on to our conversation now with Marvin Glassman.
We're here with Marvin Glassman, tennis historian, expert, and fellow mensch. Happy to be here in the Canadian Jewish News studios, recording sort of amongst the archives of our past and Jewish news, Jewish sports, and happy to be here just in time for the U.S. Open, the Rogers Cup currently going on in Canada. Marvin Glassman, about tennis Jewish history. Before the show started, just before we turned on the mics, Marvin was talking a little bit about, we were all talking a little bit about sort of the start of tennis and Judaism together. We view we talked earlier about boxing as a way out of the ghetto for poor Jewish athletes. We talked about 2 weeks ago, and tennis was really quite different. You want to tell us a little bit about that, Marvin?
Yeah, there's one common thing with tennis then and tennis now. It has always been and always will be a very, very expensive sport. Very, very few athletes, Jewish or non-Jewish, are into tennis will do anything at all without great financial support from their parents. So basically, I would say the first question people ask me, who's the greatest Jewish tennis player of all time? And the way this sport works is you're judged by winning the Grand Slams and only the Grand Slams. Sure. So we have one Jewish player, the only one that won 2 Grand Slams. His name was Dick Savitt. He won Wimbledon in 1951 and the Australian Open in 1951. Mm-hmm. He also won this tournament. In those days before corporate sponsorship, it was called the Canadian Open in 1952. And what happened in his era, Dick basically learned to kind of play tennis on his own. We had the situation where we're in an era in the 1950s that Jews basically were not allowed in many American and Canadian, I hate to say, country clubs. It was a sport, unlike the boxing, that you really had to be rich, catered for the elite. You did something else for a living, whatever it was, and you played tennis leisurely. So I'm not trying to knock the amateur era, but we're talking that once 1968 opened up the doors for all the athletes that were good in tennis to finally receive money, and that was a whole different thing. But Dick Savage really was significant because once he won Wimbledon and the Australian Open, it became less fashionable, if you want to use that word, or guilt, especially after what happened in World War II, for country clubs to say we don't allow Jews anymore.
Right.
And you got to remember the affluence is starting to increase all over America, Canada, moving into the suburbs, things like that. So the discrimination against blacks, Jews, and country clubs was starting slowly, but was starting to recede. And what happened is that as we get into now, let's talk about the era that is not the amateur, the professional era, more and more Jews got better at tennis, used it as a way to get a scholarship to very expensive American universities, and from there, they went on the pro tour. So we'll start in the 1970s. We have at least a minimum of 10 Jewish tennis players that made the world top 10. None of them, unfortunately, won the Grand Slams.
Right.
So you can't put them in the same situation as Savage. But when I first started covering tennis for Canadian Jewish News back in 1981, I would look at the draw sheet, 64, and routinely you would see 4 or 5 Jewish players in it. And when you consider the small size of our population and consider comparing to team sports where, when you have a roster team, there's 40, the fact that you could have only 100 in the world make a living out of this and at least 15 or 20 are Jews, that's another example of overrepresentation.
And at that era in the 70s, we're talking about probably Jewish people who grew up playing at either Jewish or Gentile country clubs or mixed country clubs. But there was the proliferation of not exclusively Jewish necessarily, but Jewish-tinged country clubs. We have those in Toronto as well. And probably Jewish summer camps, Jewish resorts in the Catskills, things like that, probably encourage people to play tennis at a time when there wasn't necessarily access to the restricted country clubs.
Yeah. And as that era grew in, some of them became stars, some of them very, very well known. Harold Solomon, for example, won 22 tennis titles. Tom Walker, who won this tournament in 1973, he won 30. And then we had Brian Gottfried that had won 30 titles. And then as we get into the 80s, some of the more familiar names that you may be familiar with, we had Brian Teacher, who won the Australian Open,
right.
Elliot Telcher, Brad Gilbert, Aaron Crickstein, Jay Berger. And we had a phenomenal run that there were Jews in the world top 10 from the era of 1970s to 1990. After 1990, it started to go down. And then we have a situation with Israel. I have to bring that in.
Sure.
Because what happened with Savage, we didn't talk about discrimination against him. Back in 51, after he won Wimbledon and Australian Open, he was a victim of discrimination, although he wouldn't say that because the United States Davis Cup team captain, ironically enough, it was Brooke Shields' grandfather, Frank Shields. That's his name. Yeah. He said Savage can't be on the team, and everyone was saying, why did it happen? We're talking about the writers of the era. I didn't know him, and even the late Arthur Ashe wrote in his book it was blatant anti-Semitism. So you had that as a little bit of a hinge, but also as a rally call, so to speak, for others to get involved. And
go
ahead.
I didn't know Brooke Shields had a tennis background as well as a tennis personal life. When she was married to Andre Agassi.
Yeah, maybe that
led to it.
I was going to say that means, unfortunately, Dick Savage was stuck by Frank Shields in the Blue Lagoon of tennis anti-Semitism.
Yikes. that was a long walk. So as the time went on, I mean, we don't think of there being a ton of Jewish tennis players currently. That's sort of receded, but I think that's sort of indicative of who's come up in the tennis world recently. Certainly in the men's game, there haven't really been any big American champions or North American champions since the 90s and early 2000s, right?
No, but I will make some exception that I alluded to, which was Israel, because you did have 3 significant players. And by the way, all the American Jewish players and I don't want to say they're typical athletes, but you're so involved in the sport, many of them are not going to be orthodox because you're going to lose the tournament. But a lot of them, there was a pro on the pro tour site, they went to Tel Aviv. And all the Jewish players, Harold Solomon, Brad Gilbert, they all went to compete.
Okay.
So they really showed. And usually when you compete in Israel, I don't say you get back your prize money. The expectation as a pro is that you make a very big donation to the Israel Tennis Center.
Sure.
By the way, that's what Safit did in his later years. So going to Israel, we have three significant players. One of them, it was on the women's side, Shahar Peer, who got to the quarterfinals of 2 Grand Slams and the Canadian Open. And she was a victim of discrimination in 2009. She went to Dubai, really expecting to compete. Tournament director said you could go there. Then the government officials say, we can't give you a visa. You're from Israel.
Right.
And the floodgates opened again. Now, the tournament director, to be fair, he was going to stop the tournament and all the women were going to pack up. But they asked Shahar, what should we do? Shahar said that sports and politics should never mix. I don't want to be the issue here. Go ahead. And do it. And Venus Williams, who ended up winning that tournament, made a big speech saying, I donate my gratitude and all my sentiment to Shahar Peer. And what happened, the WTA, Women's Tennis Association, they fined the tournament $300,000, said if another incident like that, you would be banned from the tournament. And they allowed Shahar Peer entry for the next 5 years, even though her ranking declined. So the year after, she was a semifinalist, but she had to be on her own court. That's how bad it is to go to those countries as an Israeli, because they were afraid if she was going to be in center court that a lot of the protesters were going to get to her. And remember, Monica Seles got stabbed. So tennis had a bad rap in terms of having good security.
I think it was a fan who was in love with her. I thought that was the story. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, it was a fan that may have been in love with Steffi Graf. It was a German, not having anti-German sentiment. It was a German that stabbed her, and he said he did it because he was concerned that Monica would ascend to be number 1 in the world, and Steffi had that rank.
And she was out of tennis for a year or so, I think, when she was recovering, right?
Yeah, a lot. And she came back in Toronto in 1995.
Right. I think I remember my cousin going to that.
And she had a later comeback later on in her career, too.
She was never the same, Bill.
Never the same, yeah, of course. Speaking of Monica Seles, or moving on, so with that Shahar Peer issue, does that mean she had to play without a crowd, just on an empty court?
On that particular court, my understanding was there were very few spectators. I won't say it was completely empty. But everyone had to be cleared by security.
Right. It's like, I mean, it's reminiscent of times in European soccer. When,
I don't know if you want to discuss this or not. It's another issue, but I'm personally disappointed that the tennis bodies basically don't condemn Dubai. They have the worldwide sponsor, and they don't treat women there.
Yeah.
We're not even talking about equally. And women's tennis always talks about Billie Jean King and all these people being out, but yet they have that big tournament there. It's all about money.
Yeah, of
course. I think that's an ongoing issue in tennis and other sports as well. Most of the sports that have the tennis style breakdown of tournaments in different places, golf, tennis, things like that, where these sort of incredibly repressive regimes in parts of the world that are anti-Semitic in some ways, anti-Israel certainly, and anti-women overwhelmingly, are allowed to sort of host the toast of the town and the toast of the sport in these places. And there hasn't been a lot of reckoning with it because there's been so much money coming in. I mean, the World Cup's going to be in Qatar in Qatar in 2 years, and 3 years. And, there's all kinds of problems associated with that. I mean, Israel's not going to qualify, but who knows if they'd be allowed to play. I mean, sure, they give their assurances that they can, but like the story you were telling about Shahar Pierce, you never know what's going to happen when you get there.
Well, the wonderful thing, though, and I want to mention just one other Israeli tennis name because it's significant, both at the Rogers Cup and what he did. We have one Israeli, he's now retired, named Andy Ram. We had an all-Israeli team. He teamed with Jonathan Ehrlich. They won the doubles at Australia, I think it was 2005, maybe off. And in the Rogers Cup, they got to be a finalist twice, 2005, 2000. But Andy Ram basically was a mixed doubles champion at all the Grand Slams except the U.S. Open. In other words, he won mixed doubles for Israel, French Open, Australia.
Right.
Who was he paired with?
A variety of women.
Okay.
You wouldn't know them. Natalie Deschamps of France, Vera Zorona. She won Wimbledon with, I forgot who he won Australia. But the significant thing that a lot of people don't understand is that in North America, we know that the popular sports in Israel are basketball and soccer, but we don't know them because they don't come here.
Right.
In tennis, it's the one world sport where the players travel and everybody knows them. So both Shahar and Andy Ram, they always told me whenever they came to Toronto, New York, they're embraced by Jewish communities. They have consulates that have parties for them.
Sure.
So it really becomes an ethnic and a very proud celebration of sports of Israel because they're the only Israeli athletes that ever come to North America.
So that's something we hear about from a lot of professional athletes, and in a lot of sports, there's stories of baseball players there's a baseball player named Ike Davis who very famously played in New York and was revered by the Jewish community there. And it helped him sort of find and embrace his Judaism because in every town he went to, there'd be Jewish fans cheering for him. And it didn't matter where he was or what team he was playing for, but Jews would support him.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I got to tell you a funny story. Brian Teacher, he was playing against Shlomo Glickstein, one of the Israeli things, but they didn't know that Teacher was Jewish. So he said, what's happening here? He said, all the people in the yard, they're rooting for Shlomo. I bet if some of them knew I was a Jew, I would have the crowd have an equal balance. That was funny.
No, for sure.
Just going back to something we touched briefly on before, there haven't been a lot of homegrown North American talents in the last couple decades. I mean, and we've talked about this before on the podcast, that in Canada, the big people coming up in tennis are all immigrants or the children of immigrants, with Denis Shapovalov, Milos Raonic, Bianca Andreescu, who's playing today.
Felix Auger-Aliassime.
Felix Auger-Aliassime. I think his dad's from Togo. I think his mom's from Quebec, but he had.
Yeah. Well, Camila Georgi, who's Jewish, she has an unusual background because her father is an Argentinian Jew.
Okay.
And before she was selected to play for Italy on the Fed Cup team, her father recruited her maybe to go to Israel, but in the end they didn't go to Israel because there was a lot more money coming from the Italian Federation.
Right. So I guess, we probably don't have a lot of homegrown, or not homegrown, but a lot of North American Jewish talent that's not sort of coming from Israel or the former Soviet Union, things like that in the near future. And I guess that's okay as well. I mean, Shapovalov has obviously been something to watch. Yeah,
he was born in Tel Aviv, and then this is an old story I wrote in the paper a lot. But now, even though, and it may offend a lot of our readers listeners, this is a Jew that plays with a cross.
I know.
It's a Greek word. But on the other hand, he also participates in a lot of fundraisers for the Israel Tennis Center. And the whole situation with him, he was born in Israel because his mother was a great tennis player.
Right.
But being a Soviet Jew, she applied to live there from the law of return.
Yep.
And that's how and as a matter of fact, Dennis, before he was famous, he was expected to play for Canada at the Maccabee Games.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Before he had his big breakthrough.
And from what I understand, he self-identifies as both Jewish and Greek Orthodox.
Yeah. A lot of marketing agents told me if he would say he was Jewish, he'd get a little more endorsement money.
Right. Well, we know where our bread is buttered as a people.
Well, this podcast is taking a decidedly pro-Shapovalov stance, and we embrace him as a Jew, even if it's not always mutual. I mean, his mother is his coach, and he grew up in Thornhill, Richmond.
We got another one from Argentina. It's called Diego Schwartzman, very more typical Jew because he's short.
Yes.
Right.
He's a short guy, a lot of power,
He's
a
not
lot of
blonde.
speed. No, not blonde.
Yeah. And he's pretty good. I mean, he's been top 20 in the world for a while.
Ranked top 20. Well,
Yeah.
he and Dennis is actually ranked currently 10 points below, but these rankings fluctuate every week.
For sure. And unfortunately, Dennis didn't have a great tournament here or in Montreal at the Canadian Open.
Yeah.
Not like last year.
Not like last year.
And on the women's side, I have to make note, we have Sharon Fishman that's making a comeback. She was away for 2 years, a lot of injuries, thinking of quitting the sport. She's engaged to another Jewish athlete, the Canadian figure skater Dylan Moskowitz, to make a long story short.
Yeah.
He had a tragic accident, and he and Sharon had a bond. They said, Sharon, I want you to go back, do your best after 2 years. So her aim right now is to make the Canadian Olympic team in tennis for 2020. And she did very well in doubles. She won a tournament in doubles. So her ranking now is back in the top 50.
In doubles.
So she may be competing with Bianca and Bouchard
that would be really cool.
on the Canadian Olympic team, and Dabrowski. She's always been a very, very good double player.
Right.
Not good in singles, because unfortunately, a part of our genes, she's pretty short.
And as far as I know, I thought mixed doubles was joining the Olympics as well.
Hope so. Mixed doubles is not that big.
Right.
Yeah. But I think there's been a lot of financial incentive, from what I understand, for the Stars to start coming back to it, and I think it is joining the Olympics coming up soon.
I think it'd be a good Olympic sport in the same way that like Olympic mixed doubles curling, which doesn't exist at all. I mean, mixed doubles tennis at least has a history of being a real thing, but it gives the Stars a chance to shine, even if it's not the purest, I don't know, athletic endeavor or whatever. Like it's a great event.
It's always a great contrast because so many tournaments. This tournament they wanted to make revenue in Montreal and Toronto, but so many of the events now are combined.
Yeah.
Right. And what you have is the situation, different style of the game, and let's face it, Maria Sharapova and many others on the tour, they're glamorous. I've seen these women do fashion shows.
Sure.
And some of the men could be models, and there's that kind of allure, especially with young boys.
Absolutely. Everyone, right. We get everyone on the court together, pay to see the Stars, and we can dream of a Sharon Fishman, Denis Shapovalov mixed doubles team for an all-Jewish, all-Canadian group.
That would really be something.
To take home some medals in Tokyo.
She went to my high school. We went to high school together.
You and Sharon
I don't know if I ever met her, but I think she was a year or two behind me.
Oh,
but
no way.
she definitely went to Forest Hill for a couple
Forest Hill.
years.
She's from Forest Hills.
Yeah.
Her parents were born in Romania. Then they went to Israel, and then they went to Toronto.
Okay, so another typical immigrant story towards doing that. And that's interesting to see from all kinds of ways. I mean, one person who we haven't talked about who is not Jewish per se but has some Jewish background. I see you nodding your head. I think you know who I'm going to talk about is Pete Sampras, whose paternal grandmother is Jewish. So not Jewish by any technical standards, and I think grew up Christian. And
he's the David Beckham type Jewish.
David Beckham type Jewish. But, I mean, Pete Sampras won, 12 Grand Slams in his career?
14.
So a quarter of that is, two and a half. That's three and a quarter. That's not bad.
Yeah, if you want to go back to grandfather, great grandfather, we're going to find a lot more.
Well, we cast a wide net here. I mean, as much as we try and resist the joke about the thin pamphlet on Jewish sports heroes, sometimes we need to do a little digging to find out who's a Jew and who might have some Jewish
connection. To me, tennis is still amazing because to have Jews in the world top 10 for 20 years,
right,
from the 1970s to 90. I forgot to mention the female side, Julie Heldman, who won the only Jewish woman that won the tournament in 1965.
Okay.
And in the last 20, 25 years, I can think of Mardy Fish.
He's not Jewish.
He's not Jewish.
No.
With a name like Mardy Fish?
He married a Jewish woman.
His
children will be Jewish. He's a nice guy.
Yeah.
A lot of people ask him, including me, but he's not Jewish.
That's what we call him.
Can't tell by the name anymore. Can't tell by the name.
That's what we call a Mike Jacobs All-Star, which is
sounds like he's Jewish, but he's not. Yeah.
And from what I know, he's well practiced in the Jewish sport of anxiety.
But and Anna Smashnova, who is a Soviet-Israeli.
I remember her.
She had a significant career.
That was the next great Israeli female player. Not as high as ranking as Shahar. Shahar, she peaked at number 11 in the world.
Okay, I think
Smashnova won more titles.
Somewhere in the teens.
12. No, but the thing is, she won 12 of 13 tournaments.
Okay.
Not the Grand Slams, unfortunately,
right,
or everyone would hear it. And it had a compelling name,
right?
But was a short player.
Oh yeah, she really had one of the great tennis names of all time. Smashnova is pretty great. Since the best name until Tennis Sandgren came around.
Yeah,
the most apt tennis name there is.
Yeah,
and Tennis Sandgren, I would assume he's not a big fan of the Jews.
Well, he's a real MAGA bro.
Yeah, he's a real Trump guy.
Yeah. Well, the odd thing when you look at individual sports, the best ways to make a living in that would be golf and tennis. And this is what I find so shocking. I know we're not talking about Jews and golf, but if you look at golf, more and more people are playing golf as opposed to tennis because you get older, it's a little harder.
Right.
But yet on the Pro Tour, not that many Jews overall.
No, not that many. We've talked
rare.
about them a little bit here and there. I'm not sure what the reason is. Maybe just where people grow up or the areas where Jews tend to live aren't necessarily as warm. I feel like to really be a pro tennis player, you sort of have to grow up in somewhere in California or Arizona. Obviously, there are Jews there, but
but now we have bubbles, so that's
true.
And I have a little bias because as a youngster, you say, okay, tennis is athletic. When you look at golf, it's very sedentary, and as a kid, you say, "God, this is boring as hell."
It could very
hit
well
a little
be.
ball. I do that in miniature golf, but you don't have that excitement. Tennis or other things, there's no running. You know what I mean? You like to run.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I also think, like you said, with tennis, it's sort of the generation is now growing into golf, as in the Jews are being allowed in a lot more places and a lot more country clubs and golf clubs than they were maybe 2-3 generations ago. So now that generational golf playing is happening.
There were restricted golf clubs in Toronto within a generation ago, 20, 30, 20, 25 years ago, Rosedale was still fighting to keep Jews out. So it's not as though this is so distant. And, as you said, the Jews, a lot of the Jews coming into the tennis world were coming from Jewish country clubs, Jewish summer camps, things like that. I mean,
Montreal was Elmridge,
right,
as I recall.
Yeah, and Oakdale here, and other ones here as well. But I went to Jewish summer camp. We had plenty of tennis courts. It probably declined in popularity. I think like when the camps were built in the 60s and 70s, I think having tennis courts was like, a real way to sell to people. But in the last 10, 15, 20 years, it's probably not as big a selling point.
Unlike football where you get injured or hockey, although the helmets are the wonderful thing about a youngster playing tennis and doing very well. I mean, the pro career is always going to be hard. You're going to get that scholarship. There's so many universities in the United States that will give you one if you have that talent. So it's good that Tennis Canada is recruiting. I think there was a Jewish player named David Volson. He never really amounted to anything in terms of his tennis because he's ranked below 1,000.
Okay.
Which is, you got to kiss it goodbye. But I think he got a university scholarship. And again, he was one of those people, father born in Russia, an immigrant, but didn't have that success. So,
okay.
Before you go, we'd love to hear some quick thoughts on the rise, fall, and disgrace of one Justin Gimelstob. For those who aren't familiar in our audience, Justin Gimelstob was a notable Jewish doubles tennis player who has sort of, in the last few years, had some legal troubles and some violence committed by him in his past and being sort of shamed out of the sport. From his spot, he lost a spot on the ATP board, I believe.
Well, let's make sure we're talking about the right person. Wayne Odesnik was arrested for home and growth, and he was thrown out because of a growth. Justin Gimelstob is today a commentator on the American Tennis Channel.
He was arrested for beating somebody up.
I didn't know that. Well, shame on him.
Yeah.
He basically had the paternal link. His father's Jewish, mother not. He identified with being a Jew. I don't want to say for the wrong reasons because it worked to his marketing advantage.
Interesting.
And a name like Gimelstob, it works when you're in New York. But he really wasn't raised there. He was top 80. Wasn't as good as the era from the 1970s and 90s.
Yeah.
Nice guy, but you know him better. So nice guys. Nice guys publicly, we don't know about their private lives. It's unfortunate what you're saying would happen with them. I wasn't that familiar, but I never really paid that much attention to Justin because he wasn't really as ever big a prominent story for me as the other Jews. He would always lose first round, second round right away. We're talking about 8 or 9 years, got a little better. He basically hanged on because he coached a lot of prominent players. I think he worked with Jack Sock and John Isner for a while.
Sure. Jack Isner is almost on the Mike Jacobs All-Stars. It almost sounds like a Jew. If he had an E at the beginning of his name.
A lot of Jews pronounce it Eisner.
Right,
my name is Isner. Eisner. And how many Jews are there close to 7 foot tall?
Right. Good point.
Very few. So we've talked a little bit about Denis Shapovalov and Bianca Andreescu, the latter of which is not by any means Jewish, but they are Canadian. And are there any Jewish up-and-coming tennis players you think
we should mention that Bianca is going for that record of the first Canadian since 1969 to win. But it must be noted that the one that ended up in the finalists, her name is Vicky Berner. She passed away. Was actually a Jewish Canadian from Vancouver.
Really?
Played for the Canadian Fed Cup team in the early 1960s. Passed away a couple of years ago at age 74, and was one of the very few Canadian Jews that made it to the WTA tour. We're talking about the Billie Jean King, Chris Evert era.
Well, good for her.
Yeah, so good for her. Now you're asking me about up and coming.
Yeah.
You never know about up and coming because 2 years ago we never heard of Bianca. What happens is that you have promising talent, and we're talking about thousands of people.
Right.
A lot of youngsters, you say, you have a good hand, good high coordination. Then the question is, who's your coach? How disciplined is the child going to be? How much time are they going to put in? And then, like everything else when you're a child, why go into tennis?
Right.
Because you're going to get a scholarship. You could get, if you're a really good athlete, you could get a contract from a football team, hockey team. Tennis, there's no guarantees. You go up. Tennis, you only get paid if you win. There's no guaranteed money. There's no sitting on the bench on the baseball team being utility infielder.
Right.
So there's no sign of risk. So it's hard to say because a lot of them, everyone is a talent, including Serena and Venus in 9 or 10. But we didn't take them seriously until they started winning. You only really know when you're 17 or 18. Right now, there isn't anybody in the pipeline, but you never know.
And I assume for men, especially, a lot of it has to do with how your body develops, how tall you get, because between the ages of like 14 and 17, someone could shoot up a foot easily, and that could totally change your game.
And you got to be lucky with the body. When you look at Milos Raonić's career, I mean, yeah, he got to the Wimbledon final, but including what happened this week, he's always injured,
right?
Intermittently injured, and
hasn't quite hit that height that we expected him.
He's
to.
a very stretched out guy. He's tall and lanky, but
a little stocky too.
Yeah, oh yeah. So he's a big guy.
Yeah.
But we still have Chapo. He's young. He's promising. Didn't have a great Canadian Open, but still lots in his future. And
it might be exciting for Sharon to get into the Olympics. We could all watch for that.
Absolutely.
And again, she's 28. I don't really think she'll ever get back to being in the top 100 in singles, but in doubles, a lot of them make a good living out of doubles.
Stan Wawrinka didn't peak until he was 28, so there's time.
Yep.
Okay, well, I think we're going to end it there. Thanks again for coming in.
Thanks very much for coming in. Enjoy.
You're welcome. It was fun.
Enjoy the semifinals, seeing Bianca play.
Yes, and look for my 2 articles on the Toronto and Montreal tournament in the Canadian Jewish News in the upcoming weeks.
Absolutely.
We'll post a link to that in our Twitter page and our show page. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Well, thanks again to Marvin Glassman for joining us today for our first in-person interview.
Yeah, that's our show for this fortnight.
Again, please like and subscribe. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
That's right. Any interesting tweets you've made recently?
Mostly
James?
just about Antonio Brown's feet and things like that.
And things of that nature.
And things of that nature. Yeah. But join us back in a couple weeks. We'll probably be talking about football preseason, getting ready for
football,
the football season, and the Jews in the NFL.
That's right. We've learned the New York Giants quarterback, future Mike Jacobs All-Star we could talk about.
Who?
Daniel Jones?
I don't think he's
Pretty
Jewish.
Jewish looking.
He sort of looks goofy. He looks like Eli.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
We'll get
join
there.
us back for next time when we break down how every New York Giants quarterback looks.
the
purely aesthetic
Jewier
standpoint.
aspects of their faces.
We'll break down the most Jewish-looking professional quarterbacks. Until then, thanks for joining us. We're the Mentorers.
Yep.